Midnight Conversations with a Friendly Monster. Written by Cold Coffee, 1775. My dad grew up in a small town, little more than a village in north-central New Mexico, called Lindrith. Population 163. My great-uncle Larry still owns a sizable swath of land that we refer to as the ranch. Every year he gives out or sells deer and elk tags on his land, on which an ancient log cabin still stands. I practically grew up there myself. My parents would take my sister and I there during the summer, and when we were old enough to hunt, I would spend a week or two out of every fall in that cabin hunting elk or deer with my dad. The landscape is breathtaking. Rows and files of nearly identical mesas and plateaus cover the area for hundreds of square miles. The smell of pinon and sagebrushes hangs thick in the air during spring and summer, like nature's own perfume. Summers are hot, but not too hot. Winters can be brutal, and the snow will blanket the area like a thick white quilt. It was a magical place for a kid with endless wilderness to explore. I have seemingly endless memories I hold very fondly of Lindrith, New Mexico. But one memory stands out very strangely in my mind. I was 8 years old. It was midsummer, and my family decided to meet my great-aunt, Bev, and Larry in Lindrith for a week. My sister Jane and I insisted on sleeping in the cabin while my parents, Larry and Bev, stayed in Larry and Bev's summer home, about a quarter mile down the road. For me, it was an opportunity to explore and let my imagination run wild, away from my parents' prying eyes. For Jane, who was 2 years older than I was, it was a chance for some simple privacy. She's always been the level-headed, independent one between the two of us. We got our stuff settled into the cabin. There was a bunk bed on one side and another queen-size bed on the opposite side of the small single-room cabin. I took the bottom bunk while Jane took the real bed. I laid out my sleeping bed and pillow and flopped onto the rickety old rocking chair. I took in the cabin for the millionth time in my childhood. The single wood-burning stove straight out of a Western movie. The propane lamp hanging from the ceiling. The two swords hanging above the fireplace that great-uncle Larry has welded together out of scrap metal for my dad and uncle when they were kids. The walls of massive logs that had been polished smooth by decades of hands. The smell of sagebrush permeating through the open door. Every aspect, every square inch of this cabin held 1,000 memories, 1,000 stories, and 1,000 possibilities. My young, overactive mind ran amok in the magic of the place. Jane and I walked back to the house after we got settled in. Mom and Bev were cooking something for dinner that smelled divine. Dad and Larry chatted over steaming cups of coffee. Coffee at 4 in the afternoon? Adults are crazy. We ate dinner. Mom and Bev had made an obscenely delicious green chili casserole. Dinner was followed by hot cocoa and s'mores cooked over a log fire on the porch. Jane liked hers cooked practically to charcoal. I preferred mine toasted to a simple golden brown. Mom and Bev chatted inside while they washed the dishes. Bev's unique and infectious laugh was just part of the ranch, as the pinyon trees, the deer, and the coyotes were. After dessert, Jane and I headed back to the cabin, each of us carrying a flashlight. The moon hung over us like a massive silver coin, casting ghostly shadows over our path through the trees and brush. Every hoot of an owl, every yip of a coyote, and every squeak of a bat made my youthful imagination run wild. I imagined that the crickets were chirping directions to us, trying to guide our way to the safety of the cabin. When we finally made it to the cabin, Jane threw a couple of sticks into the stove and lit the fire to keep us warm during the night. She then passed out on her bed. I laid down in my own bunk, eyes wide open, conjuring up fantastical stories and scenarios in my mind. After an hour or two, my eyelids finally began sliding down underneath a considerable weight. I woke up with a start. I was groggy, but it was still dark. There was a ticking on one of the windows, a rhythmic tapping. I walked barefoot across the dusty wooden floor to the window where the noise was coming from. There was condensation on the window that I wiped off with the sleeve of my hoodie. It was cold. Through the window, I could see nothing. Then, slowly, a long and bony finger slid up from below the window and tapped it 3 times with a pointed fingernail. I tapped 3 times in reply. A head appeared, wide and oval, atop a long, thin neck that reminded me of a snake. It had 2 yellow eyes that stared at me like the headlights of a car. The moon reflected vaguely off its smooth skin. "Hello," it rasped. "Hello," I replied. "Who are you?" "I am Friend," it croaked. "Friend," I said. Yes, I am Friend. And who are you?" I'm Gary," I replied hesitantly. This friend made me uneasy. "Hello, Gary," it wheezed. A wide, toothy grin appeared, stretching to both sides of its football-shaped head. "Won't you let me in? It's awful cold out here, Gary." I don't think that I should. Besides, it's cold in here too. The fire's gone out." "Oh, but I can make you warm, Gary. I can make you warm." "No, really, it's okay. Besides, I don't really know you." I was getting more uneasy at this point. "Oh," it said, its smile slowly fading. Suddenly, it seemed to get an idea. "What if we chat for a bit? Then you can know me." Yeah, sure, I guess," I told it. "Great! I think we'll be good pals, Gary." Friend asked me many questions. It asked where I was from, who my parents were, how old my sister was. The questions went on and were very personal. The interrogation seemed to go on for hours. Finally, mid-question, Friend perked one side of its oval head up as if listening for something. "I must go, Gary. Thank you for the lovely chat." And with that, Friend was gone, as if vanishing into thin air. I went back to bed, fell asleep, and slept like the dead until morning. When I woke up, I told Jane all about it. She didn't seem to pay much attention. We walked back to the house, ate breakfast of huevos rancheros smothered in green chili sauce. It was all excellent as usual. Then we spent the day riding four-wheelers and exploring the many ponds that littered the mesas. And we played with Larry and Bev's black lab, Gunner. He liked to chase spots and laser pointers. That night, back in the cabin, Jane had just fallen asleep when I heard the familiar tap, tap, tap on the window. Again, I walked over to the window and tapped in reply. Friend appeared on the other side, his crazy grin plastered to his wide face. "Hello, Gary," it wheezed. "Hello, friend," I replied. I was less wary this time. "Can I come in?" it requested hopefully. "I still don't know you, friend. I don't think that I should let you in." Friend's smile disappeared and its yellow disc-like eyes narrowed. "I think you should let me in, Gary. I can keep you warm, remember?" Its voice had taken on an edge. "But I'm already warm," I replied as I hugged my hoodie tighter around my body. I took a step back from the window. Friend's head shook ever so slightly. "Gary, let me in," it shrieked, the final word punctured with a fleck of spittle. I backed further away from the window. I'm going to bed, friend. Please go away," I said, my voice beginning to shake. Suddenly, friend disappeared just as he had the night before. I hardly slept that night. The next day was spent almost exactly the same as the previous. Larry had to repair a section of fencing where a neighboring landowner's bull had run through earlier. That evening, we played Battleship, Monopoly, which got pretty cutthroat, and a few other board games. Dinner was Reuben sandwiches. Bev's recipe for those has always been my favorite. We were planning on driving home the next day, so when Jane and I got back to the cabin, we packed up everything we wouldn't need for the night. I didn't wait up to see if friend would come, and I immediately tried to fall asleep. Later that night, I woke up suddenly again to the tapping sound. Except it wasn't a singular rhythmic tapping like before. No, it was a chorus of tapping, coming from all around the outside of the cabin. Every window, the door, and even the roof seemed to emanate the tapping. I sat up in my bed and I looked around. Jane was still out like a rock. She was always a heavy sleeper. I walked to the middle of the cabin and I looked around. As I looked, faces appeared in the windows. At every window, numerous football-shaped heads appeared, crowding and cramming to peer through. All of the oblong heads sat upon the long snake-like bodies. With thin necks, they grimaced through malevolent grins. Their piercing, round, glowing eyes were all on me. The tapping continued from the door and the roof. There were dozens of them. I scrambled back to my bed and I hid my head under the sleeping bag as if that would save me from these friends. Then the tapping stopped. After many long, uneasy hours, I finally fell asleep. We left the next morning. Once home, I collapsed in my room, grateful to be in my own bed. As much as I loved Lindrith and the ranch, nothing beats coming home after a trip. As time passed by, the memories of friend began to fade, taking a place in the recesses of the back of my mind, hiding amongst the plethora of my childhood memories. I'm 20 now. It wasn't until a week ago when I overheard my father talking to Larry on the phone that the memories all came rushing back to me. An 8-year-old boy in Lindrith, the grandson of one of Larry's friends, had committed suicide. He had doused himself in gasoline from a jerry can that he had snuck from his father's garage, and he had set himself ablaze in his bathtub. He left a note. It simply read, "I'm sorry, friend."